Good morning to you all. Very, very pleased to be here. Thank you, Andrew, for the invitation and the introduction. Katrina and Aisha, thank you very much. It's your day. And very, very pleased to be with the students. And as Ian said, I always do enjoy coming here because you make me feel welcome. You all infuse me with your aspirations and your youth and your beauty. So thank you very much for that. Of course, and also to Coventry and to Worcester, is that right? Is it Worcester, the other unit? Wolverhampton, yes, sorry, yes, good. Good to be here. I am now virtually retired, and I spend a lot of time thinking about the future, what sort of services I'll require, what sort of services will be there. Whereas at one time I was very preoccupied with giving services, and I spent about 15 years on the wards in clinical practice. Then I spent nearly 15 years teaching, and then I did research, and then I was involved in all sorts of curious stuff that I still don't quite know what it all meant. But I do spend a lot of time thinking about the past and how I came to be where I am. And again, when I come here, I'm reminded of a poet that grew up in the same part of Ireland where I was born, W.B. Yeats. And he used to come back to Cooley, that was the lake that he used to watch. And he was always intrigued by the fact he was getting older, but the swans always looked so young and so graceful. But of course what he failed to understand was they too were getting old. I started my training in September 1962. It's a long time ago. The training then was predominantly hospital-based. And in that group with me were 4 English nurses, 2 were Cockneys, because I trained in London, 4 were West Indians, were 5 Irish, 2 Germans, 3 Spanish, 2 Argentinians, and 5 Indian nuns. That was the mix. And after I finished, I went off immediately and did general training. That was the de rigueur at the time, that psychiatric nursing by itself was incomplete. You had to complete general nursing for it to be done. Of course, at that time, there was very much a biological model. And if you didn't understand physical illnesses, you couldn't do psychiatric nursing. On completion of that, I went to London University and did the diploma in nursing. It was all around me and plenty of opportunities. And after that I went into drug addiction for 2 years, as it was called, substance abuse. And that's where I became absolutely dispirited. I became depressed. I lost energy. I saw so many young people dead and dying. And I went to Libya. That was 3 years I spent in Libya. I saw Gaddafi coming into power. As a matter of fact, I looked after him while he was, after the revolution, when he was so stressed, he came into hospital and did a few things with him. And after that, I came back and I worked in Broadmoor. Then I got promotion to go to West Park Hospital. Then I was principal nursing officer at the Peace Memorial Hospital. Then I went to Manchester University to do a tutor training course. Taught in Preston for a bit, became senior lecturer down in Worcester, principal nursing teacher in Bath. And then eventually I spent 3 years here as well. And then the rest of the time was spent at the other university. And then I retired by going up to Stafford. And that's where I finished my career. So when I used to turn up for jobs, people would say, "What a very insecure, migrating, unsettled person you are." I said, "Well, that's absolutely right. I've moved around a lot. And it's not that I've been chased or I was running away from anything. It's just that I'm so adaptable, I'm adjustable, I'm so flexible." And that was my biggest learning curve, I think, in the whole of my career, was seeing different places and getting paid to do it. Well, I have lived through 18 public inquiries in mental health, mostly in hospitals, and predominantly in learning disabilities hospitals, very similar to what was happening at Mid-Staffs recently. And as a result of the places I've worked, I have seen some of the greatest compassion that one human being can give to another. I was moved beyond expression to see very distressed mentally ill patients helping and caring for other distressed mentally ill patients. That used to touch me enormously. I have also seen some of the vilest, cruelest behaviour perpetrated on patients by staff. So it's these two things that I'm thinking about in my retirement. So now I just want to come up to the present by way of a prelude to the data I'm going to present to you. And it's what I see at the moment in my retirement. So I'm no longer committed to speaking up mental health education or practices. So mental health in England at the moment, I would suggest, is much better than in other European countries. And I finished a book 2 years ago on comparing 10 other countries across Europe. I think what goes on here is better. It's not the best, but it is comparable to, it's above average. Germany puts a lot of money into mental health, but there's a lot of mental health in the country as well, particularly amongst its children. The reason being, of course, they have a medical model, and every time they put money into mental health, they build more hospitals. Same thing happens in Greece. They don't take mental health out into the community. They tend to extend the buildings they have already got. And of course, in places like Portugal, they do put money in. They get money from the Europe, but of course, they build around the centres of the population and ignore the people living up on the hills or out in the country. The other thing that's good about the UK, basically, is that it does make its problems public. You have this culture of inquiries and this culture of doing research and publicising it. Basically, you're not always clear what happens as a result of the inquiries, and do things actually get better. There is confusion in the country at the moment, as Ian was suggesting too. There's a question of national identity. It's a big crisis, basically. Are we in cahoots with the US? Are we in Europe? Should we be trading with the world? Should we be producing more? And all that has an impact on the nation's mental health. Because over 50% of people in this country with mental health problems just aren't receiving any services. That's the bottom line. And the majority of people who are receiving mental health services, all they are receiving is medication. That's taking a sort of an AWAC view of the country. That's what it looks like. Of course, the care for older people who are mentally ill is intolerable. It is abominable. I know that because one of the ministers in the health department has said so, Norman Lamb. And of course the Liberals are pushing mental health at the moment. It's going to be high on the agenda. But of course we are astute people. We know what the Lib Dems did last time prior to getting elected. They made promises about tuition fees, which we're all paying back at some time, and then totally reneged on it when they got in. They're promising all sorts of millions into mental health, but it's only putting back what's already been taken out in terms of efficiency savings. Children's services are not good in this country. You've been reading the crisis that's going on, and you probably see it. And basically, the services are not value for money. That's very unsettling. And again, research, there's a big query as to whether it is value for money, because the research is being done, but it's not being implemented. Is it that there aren't people there to implement it, or because the research, in fact, is unimplementable? Again, I think with respect to mental health nursing, there are issues around professional identity. There are issues around boundaries, and there's issues around the growing other services, the voluntary sector and healthcare assistance. And again, I think there will be a profound questioning of nursing. Now, obviously, the head nurse this afternoon will put a positive gloss on it, but deep down within other departments, there are questions around how should health be delivered? Are we merely waiting for people to become ill and then provide the services, or is there something about making the country a healthier, happier country to live in? And by the way, you do know that today is World Happiness Day. Did you know that, did you? So, yeah, perhaps that will affect me later on. At the moment, it hasn't quite got to me. It's the excitement, I think, of the eclipse. So, I just want to also say that in terms of healthcare here, you probably experience it, but it is a genuine tension. It's a paradox at the heart of mental health services, and it's this. Clients tell me this, service users tell me this, staff tell me this. On the one hand, you have the policy rhetoric, and it's the rhetoric of liberation. It's the rhetoric of emancipation, the rhetoric of benign benevolence coming from the government. So you have person-centered care. You have choice. We're all stakeholders, we're all citizens, we have a duty of care, and the government is a benign parent that looks after us all. Have you got that? Sure, I'm sure you're writing that in your essays. But on the other hand, looking through the world from a managerial economic perspective, you have cost savings, you have efficiency savings, you have time-limited interventions. You must process people quicker in order to keep up with the contracts. You must get new contracts by using the people that are already should be caring for patients, spending more time on writing bids, etc., etc. Do you see that in your lives or not? Oh dear. Oh, well, perhaps I got all this wrong there, but I don't think I have, because this is coming from various think tanks preparing all the parties for the election at the moment to make sure that they can reassure people that you don't, on the one hand, provide and lead people to believe that they're doing something, while on the other hand, preventing the resources. And now, Aisha, I hope I don't step on you. Now, that was by way of prelude to what it is I'm going to present to you. And I have been looking at the workforce, that's the jargon at the moment, the nursing workforce, in a trust further up. And it was by way of, I think, responding to criticisms that nurses were making. So this was an evaluation. It went on for about 2 years. The report recently finished. So what I'm going to do this morning is just to give you a flavour of how nurses are thinking in a very big trust at the moment, and to see what sense they're making of the world in which they find themselves. Is this one? Thank you. And here's some of the thoughts that came from the meetings that I used to attend prior to doing it. And recent management changes, I don't know whether you have time to dwell on that, have tended to adopt a very alien management culture. It's the culture of reaching targets, but it's not targets set by patients. It's targets set by government agencies. And as you know, whether you're able to think about it or not, this is a state-controlled health service that we're working in. It is a centralized bureaucracy. They tell us what to do. They give us the money to do it. They fund research that tells them that they're doing the right thing. And anybody who criticizes them, they totally ignore it. I know that because I have taken money from the Department of Health in the past, and I've had my reports come back to me to say, could you delete chapter 2, change chapter 4, make sure you don't make reference to these policies, etc., etc. All funding organizations do that. And there are several levels of health and social care being considered at the moment. And again, many politicians and many people in the Department of Health are not happy with how this Act, the 2012 Act, is being implemented. Doctors tend to see themselves as the top of the hierarchy. Well, that's what they've been educated and socialized into thinking. They are very clubbable as a group, and they are the clinical decision makers. They make decisions, whereas we carry out orders. By and large, they're independent practitioners, and they're giving away to what they consider to be collaborative working and integrated services, which by and large doesn't sit easy with them. This is stuff coming out of the Royal College of Psychiatrists at the moment. Nurses, again, are seen as being reliable, they're flexible, and they're submissive. Now you can examine yourself in the light of all of that. Who's saying this? Why are they saying it? What does it mean? And then we have very few accounts of how nurses are coping with all these reorganizations, this serial of constant change that's going on. Thank you. Again, mental health nursing is not a homogeneous discipline. Now, recent studies in the last 10 years that I've been doing show that nursing has all sorts of beliefs and practices and attitudes going on within it. As a matter of fact, some of the forensic nurses aren't able to speak to the mother and baby units. Depends on who leads the team, what the particular therapeutic model is, what they're seeking to do. Some working in nursing teams and others are not. And that has a big shift. That has a big influence on how people see themselves and how they think about themselves. If I'm working in a team and it's led by a psychologist, invariably it's going to be psychological values and practices that are similarly with social work. Some nurses are keen to enhance or advance their roles, and I'll come on to that in a moment. Others are quite happy with the status quo. So there are differences in terms of motivation. There's differences in terms of what I would like to aspire to. And then again, we have the rise of the healthcare assistants versus the nurses who are registered, but who seem to be drifting towards admin, managerialism as they progress through the course, simply because there aren't clinical pathways to absorb them all. Now, one of my daughters is a physio up in the north, and she's very impressed with the healthcare assistants. They are good practitioners who speak the language of the clients, as opposed to the professionals who play the roles of professionals and speak a professional language that people don't understand. And again, professional identity within nursing is dependent on being self-confident, autonomous, and satisfied with what you do. So those of you that are students at the moment, make sure that that's registered somewhere. Self-confidence, build your confidence. And I've just been speaking to Rebecca, who should be here somewhere. I'm so pleased, Rebecca. You are so confident. It was a delight being with you. And also the two people who were mentioned as getting the rewards. Oh, here's Rebecca, good. And autonomous. Autonomy is being eroded inside practice at the moment by virtue of procedures being prescribed, roles being defined, you're being told how much time you've got for each client, what it is you're looking at, etc., etc. And make sure that you inject yourself, your own personality. And again, make sure that you get job satisfaction. Now, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to pull a little slice of what I've been doing, and I hope I'll give you a flavour of it. I'm not going to go into great deal of depth about how it was done. I'll just get on to the findings and leave you with that. Well, this is to do with the nursing groups. I was also looking at psychologists and the medics, also looking at the managers, but I want to focus here on the nurses. These were 5 focus groups, and there was 10 in each group, and that's the agenda for change, 5, 6, and 7. You all recognize these bands, do you? So they are all people involved in services, either delivering them or managing them. So I was very interested in how they spoke about what they did and how they thought about it. And following this, the information, in fact, was very dense, and I'm still going through it. It is fascinating. And then I selected 26 participants to interview. The only thing about it was that the eligibility was that they had been in service for 3 years, so they had settled in, they had acquired experience, knew what was happening, and they were prepared to speak honestly. Now, the number of focus groups that I ran where people would say, I'm sorry, Peter, I can't speak on this because it's a team, it's confidential, I can't speak, even in the same trust. I found that extraordinary. So there was competitions within the trust between various teams. So the aims were to actually find out how nurses saw aspects of their work. And I left it to them to describe what it was that they were going to talk about. So tell me about what you do, what do you think of doing it, do you think it's effective, etc. The organisational culture and management structures in which they work, and then the future of mental health nursing, which isn't it isn't a great deal simply because they don't know. They're trying to read the newspapers, they're trying to listen to the news. So one minute we're all going down the privatised route, it's going to be handed over to the private sector because the central government can't run it or runs it inefficiently. The next minute we hear that there's more money coming down the line, central control is going to be kept by the government. Then there's a lot of self-help and handed over to the voluntary sector. All you professionals then should be going private. You should all be setting up your own So it's all confused, quite honestly. Now, 7 major themes emerged, and I will say a little about these themes as I go through. Nursing still, despite all the criticisms, is valued highly by a good many people in the service. Not by everybody, but by a good many. Nurses are seen as being flexible, as opposed to other disciplines who seem to be inflexible. So that raises issues then for the service, if some groups are flexible and others aren't. Nurses' work not always appreciated. That's a significant point. The role of the nurse is becoming unclear, a need for improvement in team functioning. It's terribly important. So there's no point in me being a good nurse if the decision-making bit of the outfit is poor. People turn up, then leave when they want to. 3:30 comes psychologists and social workers say we've got to leave to pick our children up, so it's left to the nurses to carry on the team. A need for different forms of education and training, so I'll come back to that in a moment. And it was interesting listening to Ian present that the curriculum is under review here. During all my time in teaching, there was never a time when the curriculum wasn't under review. And again, organisational aims versus service requirements. So that's a big tension in mental health, and that means simply we deliver care through organisations. The organisations are more needy than some of the clients who come to us for help. Now I want to say a little about each of these. And then nursing is valued. Well, nursing is appreciated by most service users. Now I don't quite know what is being said there, whether it is certain nurses are being appreciated or nursing as a discipline, nursing as an intervention. Now I'm going to come to this in a moment because that is very unclear inside the modern organisations that we have. Carers seem to be very grateful to nurses and some other professionals. And curiously enough, in the light of the data that I have got, the greatest critics seem to be psychologists, followed by psychiatrists. And social workers are, again, I won't say entirely happy, but I'll come back to that in a moment and I'll try and express to you the nature of their discontent with nurses. And very simply is that an inordinate amount of nurses get into very senior positions, and the result of that is that they bring with them a certain type of nursing culture which refuses to open up to other disciplines. That's how it's seen. And the other contradiction is that nurses don't know enough about biological psychiatry and clinical psychology. Well, of course you don't, because you're total, and when you put that back to the set, they're a different discipline. How much do you know about nursing? So there's that sort of tension. Now, so nurses adopt a person-centred approach. That's what we're saying. We de-role when we're with people and we meet as person to person, a humane thing, whereas some of the other professionals play roles, relate to other people in roles. Quite an interesting point, I think, if that is true. Nurses, this is a very important one, nurses were seen as helping service users to integrate all the inputs that they're getting from other people. So there's medical input, the psychological input, the social worker input. The question is, am I being fragmented? How does all this settle within me? So most of the service users and the carers were grateful to the nurses for having a bigger overview and for helping the clients to integrate these services. And again, as I said, nurses seem to engage in person-centered relationship as opposed to ones that are based on professional roles. Well, nurses are expected to be flexible. That's what they were saying, that all the decisions made in the boardroom are reliant on us as the largest workforce to carry it out. Again, all the groups recognized that nurses had a much broader view of practice than other groups. And that seemed to be true, I think, particularly of occupational therapists. They had a very limited view of service. Their contribution and how they spent their day didn't seem to be recorded on any corporate record. And people seemed to set up and do something idiosyncratically. There wasn't any system to it. Smaller groups tend to do things that they have always done, and they find it difficult to change. Now, you will find it difficult to change because you're a mass group of people, and of course, if you're led well and you're informed, it's simply the mass that confirms that you too should do it. If you're a smaller group, you find yourself in resistance. I found that with the psychologists. Psychologists were quite happy to see patients individually. They didn't want to see patients who had already been seen by nurses or medicated by doctors or they were contaminated by social workers. They wanted clean patients, as they kept saying. Well, it doesn't say much for integrated care, does it? Other groups, of course, appeal to professional bodies and custom and practice. Say, for instance, the medics would say, well, the board is telling us what to do. We're accountable to our professional bodies. We're accountable to the GMC. They tell us what to do. And then what the last point was that more flexible nurses get promoted. And that's why we want nurses to be flexible, because we can pull them into management roles and they will then keep the nurses in check. All right, a couple of mixed messages there and needs a bit of more understanding. Now, nursing not always understood. Now, this is curious as to whether, you see, nursing does not appear on any of the inter-service agreements. It doesn't seem to appear in the commissioning contract. Nobody seems to commission nursing, but they're commissioning services in which nurses deliver the top two, medication and CBT. Interesting point, isn't it? Don't you think? Right. So the question then is, what is commissioned? Well, it's the two things that are easiest to measure that are commissioned. Medication giving. It's not medication, it's not improvement as a result of medication, but it's CBT and medication giving. However, as I said, nursing doesn't appear on the commissioning contracts. Or if it does, it's disguised as something else. But nursing as an intervention doesn't appear. So that's something that the nursing workforce in this trust are bringing the commissioners in to begin to hold them to account for what it is they're commissioning. Psychiatrists and psychologists see nurses as having poor biological and psychological knowledge. Now, you can make of that what you want. To what extent should you be aware of biological psychiatry? I think you should be aware of what the psychiatrists are doing and how they see things, and you should have a point of view of whether it is effective and helpful or not. But equally, is this a type of one-upmanship? Are they playing you down? Is it card playing in the sense that you don't know as much as I do, therefore you're inferior to me? Could a bit of that be going on? And the nurses were saying it is. This is being played out every day. Then again, there's short-term contracts, agency staffing, poor career opportunities, and erosion of the skills base. So if the board did understand the value of nursing, the importance that service users attach to friendship, constancy, being able to chat about things in a language that I can understand, being available to the person that saw me yesterday, that would help me as well. Because things arose as a result of the conversation yesterday. I thought about yesterday evening. I dreamt about them last night. When I woke up this morning, I wanted to find where the person is. And then I found out she was an agency nurse and she won't be back again for weeks, after which I was gone. I mean, it's a poor way to treat clients, don't you think? Particularly, of course, when we appeal to things like consistency and all of that. And a belief that nurses can do everything. That is a belief that comes to nurses from the board. The board make decisions that tell us what to do, and they believe that we're so flexible, we're malleable, we're quite willing to do anything we're asked to do. Now, the role of the nurse is becoming unclear. A lot of very senior, experienced nurses spend a lot of their time data inputting, report writing, attending meetings, and collaborating or talking with external bodies. And the actual numbers of people seen in a week defined. I don't know whether you're aware of this, but across Staffordshire and Shropshire, OTs, nurses, and social workers must see 20 new patients every month. 20 new patients. So that's the way of bringing in income. That's new patients, because you got your ongoing patients to keep in touch as well. Actual numbers of people seen in a week defined. So there must be new patients. And that puts stress on staff to say, well, it's not in our interests, or it's not in the people's interests to come into services. They've got to be referred, they want to come in. But pressure is being put on people. It's a bit like I worked in a university in the past, where I had to bring in 20 students to make a course viable, because that was income for the university. Where the hell do I get the 20 students from? Do they want to come? And if they do want to come, they may not wish to come to me. It was an inordinate amount of pressure that I was put under to do that. Holistically, approaches can blur the boundaries of nursing. So holism may in fact be a metaphor for, well, we do everything, we don't have any boundaries. The roles of nurse consultant, advanced practitioners and clinical nurse specialists, of which there was quite a number around. The other nurses didn't have a clue what they did. They weren't visible. A lot of what they did were in offices. They were obviously processing data, so commissioners would come back and commission the services. And more skilled nurses deployed to assist managers, regulators and commissioners. I think it's very interesting, and there's something quite disturbing about it as well. And I've met these nurses. They are great people, they're bright, they're enthusiastic, they're good to be with clients, and yet management say, you're too good to be a nurse. Come and help us in planning, in commissioning, in doing audits. And 6 nurses that I got funding for in the past to do doctorates, they all started off great. 2 of them retired after getting a doctorate. Another 2 left to go elsewhere. One is working in clinical audit, and the other person is working in heading up the complaints procedure. So what I started off doing, what I got the money for, just blew off into the air. It's not what I wanted. Right, a team functioning. So not all professionals function well within a multidisciplinary setting. As a matter of fact, the psychiatrists and social workers say that not all nurses work well in a multidisciplinary setting. Not all can put forward clear and succinct accounts of what they think. Is that all right? So examples would be nurses saying that psychologists would come in and pontificate on the values and virtues of psychology, or what psychology could do. But we have got a client in front of us that we're trying to think about. What can we do in this instance? Bearing in mind that psychology isn't all that this client is receiving. They're receiving a package of care. So how do you fit into it? Few, in fact, are open to criticism. And nurses found that very disturbing when they criticised the consultant or the medical staff. Medical staff didn't seem able to take it, or were reluctant to take it, or refused or accepted to have it. Few can see the perspective of others. And again, doctors would acknowledge, and the psychologists would acknowledge, that nurses have a better understanding of clients than they do. They are looking through a clinical gaze, whereas very often you're looking through a person-centred gaze. So you know more of the person, where they come from, what sort of relatives they have, where they go on holiday. You chat to them, you get to know them, where they live, the problems they have, who are the neighbours, etc., etc. Whereas the psychological gaze and the clinical gaze and the social worker gaze is specific. Right, in some areas interprofessional relationships were very poor. Doctors came in, didn't see the patients, talked to the nurses and then left, and the patients were saying, well, when is the doctor coming to see me? Well, they have visited, and this is what they said. But I was told when I came in here that I would see the consultant. It's written down on the charter. I should have access to a doctor. I should have access to a consultant. Team meetings were cursory, care plans discussed but left to nurses to write, coordinate and implement. Now, education and training. This is some of the themes I'd like to give to you. Current training overly focuses on theoretical and managerial approaches as opposed to the development of personal relationships. Well, that's loaded. It's a big criticism. Some of the staff, in fact, had been out of training for quite a long time. Some had gone back and done different types of training. So what they mean by training and education isn't fixed, it's variable. So that was their conclusion, that their basic training was somewhat too theoretical. It's a bit like the textbooks. If you read a textbook, every patient stands up, gives you a round of applause and says, "Thank you very much, you've worked, it all worked." But in practice, it's messy. It doesn't quite work out like that. People die, people don't recover, people don't see things in the way that you do, and there's often a mismatch between how I feel, what I'm expecting, and what you give me. A better understanding of where people live, how they perceive and manage their problems. So that is moving into the zone of not curative interventions, but preventive interventions. Is that all right? That's looking with individual capital, spiritual capital, social capital. And I want to relate to you to help you to manage yourself, to draw on the resources that exist around you. I don't want you to be in perpetual dependence on me or on services. There's a tendency to oversimplify mental health, and particularly nursing. More effort is required to equip nurses with intellectual and critical skills, which it would enable them to contest and challenge. That came through in the mid-staffs inquiry, where the nurses saw patients dying around them, probably mentioned that it wasn't a nice thing to do, but didn't challenge the management. And Francis said whistleblowing should be part of the curriculum, where you can speak out if you see things that are unacceptable. And too many nurses work in isolation, many unsupervised or supervised by doctors and other professions. Now, in fact, looking back at the numbers that I spoke to, there was a minority of nurses who said, "I'd much prefer to be supervised by a doctor. I'd much prefer to be supervised by a psychologist." But the majority were saying, yes, if we had all these advanced practitioners and clinical practitioners, you know, by and large, they are quite well educated. They've had a good experience, but they don't supervise. They're all working inside management. If they were released to come out, we would love to have those as our supervisors or our models. Okay. Now, the current organizational climate, I'm coming towards the end now. Oh, yes, I better hurry up. So 80% of the respondents said that the nature of their work had changed over the last 3 to 5 years. It had changed. Emphasis now on securing contracts and maintaining existing ones. So you're being drawn into the financial model. You're being drawn into the anxieties of the organization, namely, how do we survive? How do we generate more money? How do we keep the money we have? Because we're always in fear that the auditors and the liquidators will come in and take us over, like they're doing in Lewisham, Torbay, Morecambe at the moment. That's the great fear that boards have. Losing contracts means losing job. And the number of nurses that said, our manager attended our team meeting during the week and told us straight, if we don't get the contract renewed, we're all made redundant. Now, you've heard of bullying in the workplace. I don't have to pull a gun or a knife or threaten you. That is a threat. And you're asked then to take these nurses and go out and care for vulnerably mentally ill people. Medication and CBT command better contracts. If only I can write that into the contracts, we'll get optimal funding for what it is we're doing. If we put down nursing care, that will drop the income derived from commissioning. I think we need to challenge all of this. We need to challenge it. And all, all credit to the people that I'm doing this for, further up the way. The nursing group have got together and they're challenging the board, they're challenging the commissioners. But the commissioners turned up and said, well, we can only do what the government tells us to do. They're telling us to do this. So whatever Jane says to you this afternoon, be aware of what's happening on the ground. There seems to be little emphasis on relieving human suffering, but more emphasis on reducing symptoms. Now, that's something I started when I started writing in the 70s, that was the thing that always struck me. There's a lot of emphasis on saying the person is fine now because we have managed their symptoms. But the person would say, I'm still not right. You know, I still go home to an empty home. Family are all dysfunctional. I don't have a job. I don't have any friends. You know, the dogs are eating the children where I live, and the scraps breaking out. It's not a very good place to live. And then I'm being told I've been to hospital and I'm well. I don't believe it. Medication and CBT command better contracts, little emphasis on relieving human suffering, more on reducing symptoms, and no recognition of health promotion or prevention. And then nurses do appear to be, this was their conclusion, we're still in service to the organisation. They tell us what to do. We have the NMC, we have the lead nurse in the Department of Health, but essentially it's the trust that tells us what to do. I didn't switch over there, did I? Did I switch over? Yeah. Now, some final thoughts, and I'm really coming to the end now. There are tensions within mental health services, you know, within nursing itself, within teams, between agencies. Future uncertain, public versus private. And again, the tensions of rhetoric with which I started. There's the rhetoric of liberal emancipation on the one hand. We should be providing a top-class service, a world-class service. This is what is enshrined in the policies. But there again, I have examined the policies of 10 countries. They're all playing up what it is they can deliver. And they all seem to be competing with each other. But the reality and practice is very different. Again, you have got cost-effective. My power of pressing, oh, sorry, I'm pressing the wrong thing. So, at the end of all of that, I am somewhat challenged. I have contested some of my ideas. I have been with some great nurses who have confided in me, and I have listened to them with great respect. I still believe, after all these years, from the time I started in September 1960, that the heart of mental health services is what nursing has traditionally done, what it should be doing, and what clients and service users expect from us. They expect to find another bright, interested, knowledgeable, lively human being whose mental health comes through to me in a way that I too want to regain my mental health to be like you. So you're a model to people inside their mental distress. And I was looking around for a way to finish, and I think I'll finish with this, and it struck me a lot. I have been thinking about it. If you want happiness for an hour, take a nap. If you want happiness for a day, go fishing. If you want happiness for a year, inherit a fortune. If you want happiness for a lifetime, help somebody. And that's what you are doing. You should value it. You should talk about it. You should be proud about what you do. Thank you very much indeed.
Questions with Professor Peter Nolan.
So if anyone's got any questions, go on.
Peter, thank you very much for that talk. Very interesting. Well, a couple of things you said, that nurses are very flexible and they can adapt to various situations. Does that suggest that nursing is lacking a professional identity?
Well, I think you're right. It is quite an interesting question, and when you're trying to write a report, all these thoughts come back to you. That on the one hand, being flexible is a good thing. That's what the policy documents tell us. But on another, you can be so flexible that you're not anything. It's a bit like a trumpet. It plays a tune whatever wind is passing. I think that part of the flexibility and part of the utilisation of the nursing workforce is contributing to its own lack of clarity, to its own lack of precision, to a sense of pride in what these people were doing. And I feel very sad for the 6 that I told you about. I thought they were excellent people, and they were 12 years ago when I got some funding. They were going to do nursing. They were going to do it in practice. They were going to lead. They were going to do all the things that we needed. We needed good leaders. leaders who didn't sit in offices all day processing data. You know, they were out there putting it into practice. They were a model for other people. I could befriend the staff equally as I could befriend. I think the flexibility is dangerous. I'd be inclined to be wary of it. And I don't like to, when I present my stuff to boards, oh, the nurses will do it. We'll get them to do it. We'll tell the managers what to do. The nurses will do it. Is that all right? So I am warning. You can be so flexible. You can work yourself out of business. You look at the other groups. They're very clear about what they do. And OTs finish at 5 and that's it. They're going. And the psychologists are only taking referrals from the GPs, not from the wards, because they've already been medicated, they've been doctored, they've been nursed, etc., etc. We can only give psychological intervention to clients who come to us for the first time. That's being said at the moment. I'm not making this up. This is happening. So there's that tension going on. And of course, what is happening in practice is that these tensions, these divisions, the boards choose to ignore them. The research stuff coming back from the social research people, coming back from the manager, they're bringing out all of this. That the policies, they're suggesting that there is an order out there, there's an existing order, and the policies are being accepted in the same way across. I don't think that's true. If you read the managerial stuff, and some of you may be doing management here, you'll see the conflict of interest. And it's policy upon policy, and they're all assuming that we're going to start from scratch. No, there's an existing world there. Right. I think I'm finished now. Yes.
Obviously, you spoke at length about the gap really between this sort of career progression and advancement and willingness to further your own nursing.
Yes.
But the fact that you're going into management positions that are so isolated and insular with regard to what's going on in the ward.
Yes.
What single or couple of recommendations would you make in terms of how nursing management should be structured so that you maintain the skills in those nurses and use them in the best possible way?
Yeah. Well, it is quite it's a thoughtful question. It's a challenging one. And I think however good I'll respond to it, I think I'll miss the point that you're trying to. Looking back over my time, nobody ever told me about this. It was something I fathomed out for myself. And I was two people during my working life. I did go to work as a nurse, as a tutor, as a lecturer, or whatnot. I went and I filled the role. And others confirmed me in that role, and I tried to do it as best I could because I didn't want to take money under false pretenses. But on the other hand, I was myself, to which I should return in the evening time. And I'd sometimes think about the role I played during the day. And my conscience was such that I used to say, am I deceitful? Am I dishonest? Am I really just shirking things to get through the day? Have I really helped people? And am I helping people? And how would I help people? Am I respectful? So I had this constant questioning going on within me. I did encounter a lot of people who were careerists, who were ambitionists, that get on at any cost. And I think that they could abandon values and practices so easily. They did leave me questioning, and I did question a lot of people along the way, that one time you'd see them one job and then they dismiss it and move on somewhere else. But I think the management structures that we've got to ask ourselves, what are the values that underpin modern management? And they are the values of capitalism, whether you like it or not. And capitalism is basically everything has a value. It has a monetary value. And I think that is right. I'm not against that. That employing you to care for the people of Birmingham costs money. That money has got to come from somewhere. If we're not performing terribly well at exporting and making things, the money in the exchequer is less. So George Osborne will tell you there'll have to be cutbacks in the public sector, and if we get elected, there'll be more cutbacks. It's as simple as that. You'll have to get people to look after themselves. I think, in response to the question that you've asked, if you promote me into a management job, you expect me to do a management position. I am in service to the organisation first, to the survival of it, to the generating of incomes, to the fact that we as a group will survive. But I think when I step back into my person, I can maintain my own conscience. I can maintain my own values, my own ethics, to say what is happening in the units, the outpatients, the wards, on a day-to-day basis of the people who come to us in distress, in pain and in suffering. It's how they're met, that is the product that we're selling. If that isn't right, if I don't go down to the staff and I spend some time with them, I thank them for what they're doing, I reveal my personhood to them, my personality to them, and it's the person in me that's thanking you, the person in you, for what it is you do. And that is different from me as a manager coming around saying, you as a unit manager, your contracts are falling. Do you understand? It's me, it's too different. And I think the best managers that I know, and there are some great chief execs across the country, believe it or not, there are chief execs now that I used to teach when I first started, and and they are good, honest people. They have good values. It grates on them that they have got to play the game of targets, money, etc., etc. When they look around and they say to people, you lot are a very expensive overhead to me, as was said to me many, many years ago in this university by the Vice-Chancellor that then was. He met the staff and said, you're all a very expensive overhead to me. It's not good, it's not good. Do you get the point that I'm making? So look after your personhood, look after your own values. Thank you very much.